He fixed cars with nothing but rusted tools, a worn-out garage, and a quiet son who rarely spoke. Every day was a struggle until a woman in a luxury car rolled in, hiding more than just a broken engine. What happened next changed his life forever. If you believe in second chances, quiet miracles, and the kind of love that restores more than just machines, stay with us. And if stories like this speak to your heart, feel free to subscribe to Soul Moments. Story for more real healing and unforgettable journeys. Ready to begin? Let's open the garage door, the mornings in Pine. Hollow always began the same way for Silas Boone. A burst of static, a gentle thump on the side of the ancient radio, and the familiar chords of Take It Easy by the Eagles, warbling through the garage like a ghost from the past. Sunlight streamed through the dusty pane above the workbench, slicing the space into warm gold and cool shadow. The garage Boone auto smelled like old oil sawdust, and Time Silas, a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, with hands tough as leather and a voice weathered by years of wind and grief, was crouched beneath a 1974 Ford pickup. His knees creaked louder than the socket wrench in his grip. "Come on, baby," he muttered, giving the bolt a final twist. "One more time for your old man." He wasn't talking to the truck. Behind him, 11-year-old Finn Boone stood on a milk crate, carefully inspecting spark plugs lined like toy soldiers across the bench. He wore a flannel shirt, 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a pencil tucked behind his ear. His dark blonde hair curled under the brim of his baseball cap, which bore the faded logo of Boone. Auto stitched there decades ago by Silas's late wife, Clara. "Dad," Finn said, quietly, pointing. "This one's got carbon buildup." Silas ducked out from beneath the truck, grinning despite the grease streak across his cheek. "That's my boy, Sharp Eyes." Finn beamed but didn't say another word. He rarely did. They worked in silence for a while. Comfortable. Steady, the kind of silence that has roots. It was broken only by the clink of metal on metal, the swish of rags over glass, and the murmurs of the radio shifting to peaceful, easy feeling. Silas glanced toward the corner of the garage, where an old wooden workbench stood like an altar. Above it hung a calendar from 1976, perpetually frozen on the month his father bought the Impala that changed their lives. Next to it, pinned in place by a rusty nail, was a faded towel embroidered with the word, Moms. He kept it there because Clara used it every morning when they worked side by side. She wasn't just his wife. She'd been the best mechanic he'd ever known. She could hear a misfire from 30 yards away and fix it with nothing but a wrench and a wild grin. Now it was just him and Finn, and the ghosts. The sound of metal hitting concrete snapped Silas out of his reverie. "Finn," he called. "I'm sorry." Finn cried, his eyes wide with alarm. At his feet lay a broken tool. Old Reliable, the bent-handled wrench Silas had inherited from his father, the one he swore still worked better than any modern junk. Silas strode over, picked it up gently. The shaft had split clean in 2. "It slipped," Finn whispered. For a long moment, Silas didn't speak. He turned the wrench over in his hand like he was holding a memory. Then quietly, he knelt beside his son. "It's okay," he said. Finally, she had a good run. Finn looked unsure. Silas ruffled his hair. "Some things break, son. But that doesn't mean they didn't do their job well." Just then, the garage bell clanged, a hollow metal chime tied to the door handle with fishing line. A car had pulled in. Silas wiped his hands on Mom's towel and stepped outside. There, parked slightly off-kilter beneath the rusting Boone Auto sign, was a 1968 Shelby GT500 seafoam green paint, chipped in just the right places to say, "I've lived." Smoke curled from the hood like a sigh, and beside it stood a woman. She wore a canvas jacket, black jeans, boots dusted in road grit. A wide-brimmed hat shaded most of her face, but the sunlight caught the curve of her cheek and the shape of her lips pressed together in a frown of frustration. "Engine overheated?" Silas asked. She nodded. "And leaking oil?" "I think she's had enough of the desert." Silas walked around the car, eyes scanning. 68 Shelby GT 500. Not many left on the road. "You're driving a piece of history," I know she said. "That's why I brought her here." He raised an eyebrow. "You from around here?" "No," she replied. "But I was told. This is the place where people still fix things the right way." Silas almost laughed. "Is that so?" She held out her hand. "Name's Marin Claymore." He shook it and felt something curious. Her palm was calloused, like someone who worked with tools, not just spreadsheets. "Well, Marin Claymore," he said. "I'm Silas. This here's Boone Auto. We fix more than cars." Her eyes flicked up to the faded sign, then to the towel hanging on the wall. "I believe you," she said softly. That night after the Shelby was safely inside, and Finn had gone to bed, Silas sat alone on the bench, Old Reliable beside him, cracked clean through. He stared at the towel Clara had stitched, and the radio played one last song before falling to static. Let It Be. He didn't know why that song hit him different. Maybe it was the voice. Maybe it was the silence it left behind. Maybe it was the way Marin had looked at him, like she saw something beneath the rust. Silas Boone, a man who had long stopped believing in second chances, felt something stir inside him. And outside, under the orange glow of the porch light, the seafoam Shelby slept quietly waiting. Marin Claymore returned 2 days later, just as the morning sun settled like soft honey across the front steps of Boone Auto. The Shelby's engine purred low, like it had slept off its tantrum, but still held a grudge. Silas heard the familiar metal chime from inside the garage before he even saw her. He was beneath a '92 Bronco, coaxing a reluctant axle into submission, when her boots appeared next to the tire. They were cleaner now, but still carried the scuffs of someone who'd walked more than she talked. "Didn't expect you back so soon," he said. Voice muffled. "You said you'd take a look at the Shelby's radiator. Figured I'd let you." He slid out on the creeper, blinking up at her. In the full light of day, her features were clearer. Sharp cheekbones, softened by sun. Eyes the color of wet bark. She looked like someone who belonged in two worlds, but had never really claimed either. "Keys?" he asked, standing up and wiping his hands on a red shop rag that used to be a 4th of July bandana. She tossed them underhand. "Catch." Silas nodded toward the porch. "There's coffee in the old percolator, if you don't mind. Strong and slightly burnt." She smiled barely. "I've had worse." Inside the garage, Finn was sketching in the corner, a yellow pencil flying across a dog-eared sketch pad. He looked up briefly at the sound of Marin's voice, then returned to his work. Silas noticed that of all the people who'd come through, Boone, Otto Finn had never kept his eyes on anyone the way he did with her. Silas popped the Shelby's hood. The engine bay was a shrine to old-school American craftsmanship. He ran a hand gently along the metal, as if greeting an old friend. "Your dad take good care of her." Marin stood beside him, mug of burnt coffee in hand. He did, until his last day. Then she sat in the garage for 10 years. I think she got tired of waiting. There was something wistful in her tone, a tenderness wrapped in weariness. Silas nodded, inspecting the cracked radiator hose. "Needs a new hose and a flush, but the core's intact. I've seen worse. Can you fix it?" "Sure can. Might take a couple of days to get the right part." Most folks junk these classics. Not many asking for this kind of love anymore. She sipped the coffee. "I'm not most folks." He looked at her again. "I can see that." They worked in parallel that day, Silas fixing, Marin lingering. She didn't hover or talk too much. She wandered the garage, touching things lightly. An oil can, a photo nailed to the corkboard, the corner of Finn's latest drawing. At lunch, she offered sandwiches from a brown paper bag. "I didn't come empty-handed," she said. "Turkey or ham?" Silas raised a brow. "Ham, always." Finn looked up from his sketch pad. Maren handed him a sandwich wordlessly, then sat on the old bench just outside the garage door, where sunlight dripped across her boots and pooled like golden syrup on the cracked pavement. "Did you grow up around cars?" Silas asked, easing down beside her with a grunt. Maren took a moment. "No. But I grew up around men who didn't know how to say they loved you, so they taught you how to change your oil instead." He laughed more from surprise than humor. "Sounds about right." She glanced sideways. My old man, built this garage from nothing. My wife, Clara, ran it better than I ever could. She passed 5 years ago. Cancer, I'm sorry," Silas nodded. "Me too." There was a quiet between them, not awkward, but reverent, like the kind of silence you hold for the dead. Finn broke it by walking over, holding out a page from his sketchbook. Maren took it carefully. "What's this?" "It's a blueprint," Finn said softly. "A garage that fixes more than cars." Silas blinked. Finn rarely spoke to strangers, especially not with that much clarity. Maren looked at the drawing. It was childlike, yes, but thoughtful. Bays for cars, a waiting area with couches, a kid's corner with books. At the top, scrawled in block letters, were the words, "Garage of Wishes." Her voice caught. "This is beautiful," Finn shrugged. "You can keep it if you want." She folded the paper with a kind of reverence, then met Silas's eyes. "You're raising a remarkable kid." Silas smiled, and it wasn't guarded this time. "I'm just trying to keep him safe and curious." That night after Maren left, Finn lingered by the window longer than usual. Silas stood in the kitchen, rinsing off grease with hand soap that never quite worked. On the old tape deck, Desperado played low humming against the silence. Finn turned. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy. Is she coming back?" Silas dried his hands on the towel with Mom stitched at the hem, I think, so, "Good," Finn said. "She doesn't talk too loud." Silas chuckled. "No, she doesn't." But he didn't say what he was really thinking, that Maren Claymore had walked into his garage with a broken car and somehow left behind the faint scent of hope. It was strange how a woman you barely knew could sit on your porch, sip terrible coffee, and still manage to fit into the silence like she belonged there. As Silas tucked Finn in that night, he noticed the sketchbook lying open on the bed. Next to the Garage of Wishes, Finn had drawn a second figure, a woman holding a wrench, smiling. And beside her, scrawled in pencil, were 3 words. "She gets it." The next time Maren came by, she didn't drive the Shelby. Instead, she pulled up in a beige station wagon that looked like it had retired in 1993 and been dragged back into active duty. Silas raised an eyebrow from under the hood of an old minivan and gave her a mock salute. "Borrowed it," she explained, sliding out of the car with a tote bag slung over her shoulder. "Didn't want to put too many miles on the Shelby while she's still healing." Silas chuckled. "This one's got charm." "Yeah, charm and the suspension of a drunken cow." Finn, seated cross-legged near the garage wall with his sketch pad, looked up and smiled, a rare thing outside his father's jokes. He set his pencil down and watched as Maren placed the tote bag on the bench. "I brought something," she said, unzipping the bag. "Not tools, just memories." Silas stepped closer. Inside the tote were several carefully wrapped bundles. One by one she unrolled them. An oil-stained garage apron with a faded name patch R. Claymore stitched in crooked letters, a metal keychain shaped like a spark plug, and a small leather notebook. She handled each item with the tenderness of someone holding a person. "Not a possession. My dad's," she said simply. "I've been carrying them around," not really knowing why Silas nodded. Sometimes memories weigh less when you share them. She paused, then handed him the notebook. He flipped it open. Inside were diagrams, notes, torque settings, handwritten in neat masculine block letters. There were little side notes, too. Marin remembered to triple-check your lug nuts. Don't want to lose a wheel at 80, Silas smiled. He taught you. She looked out toward the horizon. He tried. I didn't listen much. Not until he was gone. Silas returned the notebook gently to the bench. He'd be proud you're trying now. Marin didn't answer, but she sat on the bench beside Finn, who silently handed her a fresh sheet from his sketch pad. "You can draw something if you want," he said softly. She hesitated, then picked up a pencil. After a few tentative strokes, she drew the outline of a wrench, awkward, imperfect, but earnest. Finn studied it for a long moment, then added a tiny heart at the bottom. Silas watched the exchange from the doorway. He didn't say anything, but he felt something shift. There was a new rhythm forming in the garage, like an engine that had finally found its timing. Later that afternoon, Marin walked into the main office, a cramped room with a squeaky chair and a desk that had belonged to Silas's father. She pointed at a frame on the wall. "That your wife?" she asked. Silas glanced over. The photo was slightly crooked, sun-faded. Clara stood there with grease on her face, flipping off the camera while grinning ear to ear. "Yeah," he said, stepping beside her. "She was the heart of this place. She looks fierce." "She was," Silas said quietly. "She knew every bolt, every hose, every weird little tick an engine could make. We met in trade school. She could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded by graduation. She passed 5 years ago, right?" He nodded. "Ovarian cancer. She fought harder than anyone I've ever seen. Even toward the end, she insisted on helping in the shop. Said if she was going out, she'd do it with grease on her hands and music on the radio." Marin looked back at the photo, her voice softer. "You ever think about selling this place?" Silas shook his head. "Every week, and every week I don't." She didn't press. Instead, she walked back into the shop, her eyes drifting to the calendar still frozen on July 1976. "That was the month your dad bought the Impala. Yeah, paid cash. Called it his second child." Finn appeared beside her with a small bundle in his arms, the broken wrench now glued and reinforced with resin, the handle rewrapped in electrical tape. He held it out to Silas, wordless. Silas took it as if it were glass. "You fixed it." Finn looked down, then up. "It still works." Silas blinked hard. "Yeah, buddy. It does." Marin placed a hand over her chest. "That's one hell of a restoration." Silas set the wrench carefully on the workbench. Old tools are like people. Beat up, cracked, but if the core's strong, they've still got purpose. The sun dipped lower, staining the garage in amber light. Marin packed up her things and paused at the door. "I have a meeting in Tucson tomorrow," she said. "Might be gone a few days." Silas nodded. "Drive safe." "I always do," she said, then looked over her shoulder, "except when I'm trying to outrun something." He didn't answer, just watched her go. That night, Finn taped his sketch of the wrench with the heart on it, above his bed. Below it in careful handwriting he added, "Some things work better after they've been broken." Silas stood at the door for a long time, reading those words again and again. Then he went downstairs, turned on the radio, and let the static hum for a while before landing on a song he hadn't heard since Clara died. Dreams by Fleetwood Mac. He didn't cry, but he didn't move either. Something in his chest, long dormant, was quietly beginning to turn again, like a rusted gear coaxed back into motion. And out in the night, under the stars, the Shelby rested quietly by the curb, as if waiting for someone to believe in its best miles still being ahead. The Shelby sat like a green relic beneath the half-burnt October sky. A few crisp leaves had caught on the windshield, refusing to let go. Silas stood beside it, arms crossed, eyes narrowed not at the car, but at what she represented. A story partly told. He could feel it in the way Maren touched the hood, like it was someone she once loved. She returned 4 days later, the Tucson dust still clinging to her boots. No blazer, no briefcase, just jeans, a faded t-shirt that read, "Claymore Racing Team," and a look that told him she'd seen more than spreadsheets while she was away. "Radiator came in this morning," Silas said, greeting her with a nod. "You work fast?" "I work true." She smiled, small but real. "Then I brought you something that might matter." From the back seat of the station wagon, she lifted a black, dented toolbox and carried it like it was made of porcelain. When she opened it on Silas's workbench, it wasn't full of sockets and wrenches. It was a museum. Old notes, racing tickets, a laminated pit pass from Daytona '83, a photo of a younger Maren in pigtails, sitting on the fender of the Shelby, with her father's arm looped protectively around her. Silas leaned in without touching anything. "He built this car with his own hands," she said. "Every weekend, every spare dime, I grew up inside this car. First ride, first fight, first heartbreak, all of it. And after he died, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Until now." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Sometimes fixing a car means facing what broke you." She nodded. "That's why I came back." He gestured to the open bay. "Let's get her up." They worked side by side for the better part of the morning. Silas on the radiator, Maren on the lower hose. Her hands weren't as quick, but they were careful. Respectful. There was grease under her nails and a smear across her cheek, and she didn't seem to care. When she stripped a bolt, she laughed and said, "That one's for Dad. He always told me to go easy on first threads." Finn watched them from a corner, sketching the scene with quiet focus. He wasn't drawing the car. He was drawing the people. At lunch, Maren sat beside Finn under the maple tree in the side yard, sharing slices of ham and cheddar on wax paper. She pointed to his sketchbook. "Can I see?" He nodded, flipping to a new page. A garage with 3 bays. Sunlight pouring in, people smiling. At the top, he'd written, "The Fix-It Family." Maren blinked rapidly. "You're really something, Finn." He looked down. "It's just pictures." "No," she said, her voice thick. "It's hope." Back inside, Silas wiped his hands and turned to her. "You ever wonder why you showed up here?" Maren hesitated all the time. He nodded toward the Shelby. "Because that car, that story, isn't finished. And neither are you." She looked down, then back up. "Neither are you." Silas, that night after the garage closed, Silas pulled out the logbook. His wife Clara had kept a thick, battered ledger full of receipts, tune-up notes, and little love scribbles in the margins. On the final page was her handwriting. "Keep fixing things, especially yourself." He hadn't opened it in 4 years. Now he traced her words with a trembling finger. The next day, Maren brought over a folder with typed pages. "Thought you should see this," she said. He opened it and froze. Schematics, business plans, funding models. At the top, the title, Boone, Auto Expansion Community-Based, Restorative Garage, Network. Silas raised his eyes slowly. "What is this?" Maren took a breath. "It's a proposal for a non-profit initiative. Veteran mechanics, young apprentices, folks getting back on their feet. I've been working on this idea for years, but I never had the right anchor." "Until I found your garage." He stared at her, stunned. "Why me? Because this place isn't just about oil changes and brake pads. It's about people." You know how to fix things that don't show up on diagnostics. And Finn, he sees what the rest of us miss." Silas sat down, the folder still open in his lap. For a long time, he said nothing. "Then you're a CEO, aren't you?" Marin blinked. "I was. Stepped back 6 months ago. Too many boardrooms, not enough soul." He exhaled hard. "I should have known." She sat across from him. "That's why I didn't say anything. I wanted to see if you were real before I brought you all this." He looked up, eyes tired but clear. And now she smiled. "Now I know you're more than real. You're necessary." That night, Finn found his father sitting on the porch, staring up at the stars, with the proposal still in hand. The radio played softly from the window, something slow, melodic. Finn sat beside him. "You thinking?" "Yeah," Silas said. "About what it means to build something bigger than yourself." Finn looked up. "Like Mom did?" Silas nodded slowly. "Exactly like Mom did." Inside, the Shelby gleamed faintly under the shop lights. Her engine was whole again. But more than that, something invisible had shifted between wrench and memory, grief and grace, and neither Silas nor Marin quite knew what to call it. But Finn, with his quiet wisdom, he added a new drawing to his wall that night, a heart inside, a gear with 2 names written beneath it in blocky, hopeful letters. Boone and Claymore. It started with a rattle. Not from the Shelby or any customer's car, but from the old transistor radio that had been a permanent fixture in the corner of Boone Auto since the Carter administration. The same one Clara used to turn on every morning while humming along to Patsy Cline or the Eagles. For weeks, now it had wheezed through songs, clinging to its last breaths, like an old friend refusing to say goodbye. One morning, Silas hit the side of the unit as usual, hoping to coax another hour out of it. This time, it didn't budge. "Looks like we've lost her," he muttered. Finn looked up from his sketch pad. Brows knitting together, he was seated on a stool, legs swinging slowly, face flushed from the unseasonably warm October air. He rarely interrupted his father's rhythm, but today something stirred inside him. "I want to fix it," he said. Silas turned surprised. Finn was holding a screwdriver in one hand, the kind Clara used to call her precision wand. It was too big for him, but the grip was steady. "You want to fix the radio?" Silas asked carefully. Finn nodded. For Mom, Silas swallowed hard. "All right, you'll need to open the back casing gently. It's brittle." Finn carried the old unit to the workbench like it was holy. Marin, who had just arrived and was setting a cinnamon muffin on the counter, paused mid-step. She watched as Finn took a deep breath and began unscrewing the panel fingers, tentative, but determined. "I didn't know he liked electronics," she whispered. "He doesn't," Silas said. "He likes stories, and this one hums like her." For the next hour, Finn tinkered. Marin offered no help. Only observation. Silas stayed close but silent. At one point, Finn stood up, walked over to the garage wall, and retrieved a dusty mason jar Clara used to keep mismatched screws. He shook it gently, the sound oddly soothing. Then he returned to the bench and got to work. Midday sun slanted in through the open doors, casting long golden lines across the floor. A breeze rustled the old paper calendar still stuck on July 1976, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. Finn adjusted the solder points, replaced a wire with one he found in an old VCR machine, then carefully screwed the back on. His hands trembled slightly, but he didn't pause. He plugged the radio in. It buzzed, coughed. Then, like an answered prayer, it sang, "Let it." Silas froze. Finn stood still as stone, as if afraid to break the moment. The music crackled and wavered, but played true, the lyrics floating out like warm light. "When I find myself in times of trouble, Maren wiped her eye with the corner of her sleeve. Silas walked over and crouched beside Finn, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She'd be proud of you, bud," Finn whispered. "It still works," Silas nodded. "Ah, just like you." They left the radio playing through the afternoon. It was as if Clara herself was humming from the rafters, filling the garage with a presence that was both memory and miracle. Later that day, while Silas worked under the hood of a rusted-out Impala, Maureen took a call out by the tree line. Her voice was soft, but firm. Her posture alert. Silas didn't mean to listen, but he caught fragments. "No, I haven't decided yet. It's not just a proposal anymore." "Yes, I understand the stakes." She returned 10 minutes later, eyes unreadable. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Just business things. You don't have to pretend with me." "Maren, I'm not," she said, then softened. "I'm just figuring out how to let go of the life I thought I needed." That evening, as the sun slipped behind the far hills and the air turned cool, Finn appeared with a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Maren without a word. She opened it and found a drawing of the Shelby, perfectly shaped and shaded. But instead of sitting in the garage, the car was on a road beneath a wide sky, stars peeking through. In the passenger seat sat a woman. In the back was a little boy with a wrench. Beneath the picture were the words, "Some journeys don't start with directions, just with the right company." Maren held the page like it was a gift more valuable than gold. She looked at Silas. "He sees everything, doesn't he?" "He gets that from his mother." Silas replied, his voice low. "You sure about that?" she asked, eyes gleaming. Silas couldn't answer. Not with words, but he felt something inside him, quiet, strong, click into place like a gear finally finding its groove. Before Maren left that night, she turned to Finn. "Can I keep this one?" Finn nodded. "It's for your toolbox." She smiled wide. "Then it's the most important thing in there." After she left, Silas lingered in the garage alone, radio still humming faintly in the background. He walked to the shelf, pulled down Clara's old ledger, and added a note beneath her last entry. "Fixing more than cars. One song at a time." Outside, the wind picked up, stirring the leaves into quiet motion. And somewhere inside the bones of Boone, Otto, a new beginning had already begun, humming its tune, soft, persistent, and beautifully out of the blue. The desert wind changed direction that morning. It brought with it a dryness that clung to everything. Skin, metal, and truth. Silas was replacing brake pads on a beat-up Chevy Malibu when a gleam of black paint caught his eye. A luxury SUV slowed outside the garage. Its windows were tinted, its tires spotless, the kind of car that looked allergic to gravel. Maren stepped out of the passenger seat, but she wasn't dressed in canvas or grease-stained denim this time. Today she wore a tailored navy pantsuit, heels that clicked against the asphalt, and a leather satchel clutched in one hand. Her hair was tied back, sleek and deliberate. She looked like someone who gave orders in glass towers, not someone who leaned over carburetors. She saw him watching and walked straight over Silas. He wiped his hand slowly. "New look. Board meeting in Tucson," she said. Her voice clipped. Didn't have time to change. "You didn't drive yourself." "No," she said, glancing back at the SUV driver from the company. "He's harmless." Silas didn't answer right away. He looked past her toward the Shelby, which sat like a loyal dog in the corner of the garage. Then he looked back at her hands, still calloused, despite the polish. "I thought you said you stepped away from all that I did." "Mostly," he nodded. "Mostly." Finn appeared in the doorway behind him, still holding the breakfast bar he hadn't finished. He blinked at Maren, his eyes flicking from her shoes to her briefcase. Then he turned away without a word and went back inside. Maren sighed. "That's fair. You could have told me," Silas said quietly. "I know. But you didn't. She set the satchel down and leaned on the workbench, suddenly tired, because the moment I did, I wouldn't just be Marin anymore. I'd be Claymore. And that name has weight. Claymore, he repeated. As in Claymore Financial Group. She nodded. Third-generation chairman since 38, Forbes cover at 40, burned out by 41. Silas folded his arms. You came here to hide. I came here to breathe. The radio still miraculously functional after Finn's repair crackled softly with an old Fleetwood Mac tune. Silas stared at the dial like it might offer some guidance. You want to fix this place, he said. Fund it. Expand it. Make it something bigger. Why, because it already is something bigger, she said. You just don't see it. Maybe I like it small, he muttered. Marin didn't push. She simply looked around her gaze, lingering on the mason jars filled with screws, the calendar from 1976, and the hand-drawn sign Finn had taped to the back office door. Fix it, Family HQ. I'm not asking you to change the soul of it, she said. Just to believe that more people could use what you've built. He stayed quiet, the silence filling with tension and something else. Not resentment, not quite trust either. Something in between. Finally, he said, I need time. I'll wait. She picked up her satchel and turned to go. But then she stopped at the doorway and looked back. I'm not proud of everything my name has built, but I'm proud of who I am when I'm here. With you. And Finn, and then she was gone. The SUV disappeared down the long road, and the garage fell quiet again. That afternoon, Silas found Finn sitting in the back lot behind the shed, where Clara once stored spare tires and wildflowers in coffee cans. He sat beside his son, who didn't look up. You okay, buddy? Finn shrugged. She lied. Silas exhaled. She didn't lie. She just didn't tell us. Yet Finn kicked at a pebble. Do you still trust her? Silas looked up at the pale sky. I trust what I see when she's here. That means something. Finn was quiet for a long time. Then he pulled a folded paper from his back pocket and handed it to Silas. It was a drawing, this one more jagged than usual. The Shelby was in the background, but front and center stood Marin in her suit. Her eyes were sad. In one hand, she held a wrench. In the other, a name tag. Hello, I'm Silas, traced the outline gently. Sometimes, he said, people don't know which version of themselves to introduce first. Finn glanced sideways. I think she wants to be. Both, Silas, smiled. That's the hard part. Later that evening, as the garage lights buzzed to life, Silas unlocked the drawer beneath Clara's ledger and pulled out an old photo. Clara standing with a group of young women in mechanics' uniforms, her hand on her hip, fire in her eyes, on the back in Clara's script. It's not about what you fix, it's about what you restore. He sat with that photo for a long time. Then slowly, he opened Marin's proposal. He didn't read it all, just the first page, just enough to understand the heart behind the structure. And he realized something he hadn't admitted until now. He was afraid that opening the garage to the world might erase what it had meant to him and Clara. That inviting change might cost him the last piece of the life they'd built. But more than that, he was afraid that not changing would make all of it fade. He looked around at the tools, the shelves, the corners only Clara had touched, and at the quiet bedroom upstairs, where a boy named Finn drew blueprints of dreams. And he knew this place couldn't just belong to the past. The future was knocking with heels and grease-stained fingers. And Silas Boone was almost ready to answer. The first frost arrived on a Wednesday. It crept along the edges of the garage windows, left icy lace on the hoods of half-repaired cars, and turned the air inside Boone. Auto sharp enough to bite, Silas struck the space heater with a wrench to coax it into life. It groaned but obeyed. Finn was bundled in 2 flannels and a wool hat hunched over his sketch pad, like a monk with scripture. He hadn't spoken much since Marin left 5 days ago. The radio, miraculously still humming after its resurrection, filled the silence with old Otis, Redding soft, aching, and slow. Silas had been quieter too. Ever since Marin's confession about her identity and the proposal still sitting unread past the first page, something had lodged in his chest. Not anger. Not regret. Disappointment aimed mostly at himself. He turned a wrench in his hand, the metal cold against his palm. Old Reliable. The patched-up tool Finn had fixed weeks ago still lay on the workbench. He hadn't used it since. Somehow it felt too sacred now. By noon, the garage felt colder than it should. The heater sputtered and died. Silas stared at it like a fallen soldier. "Guess we're working with winter breath today," he muttered. From behind him, Finn spoke startlingly clear. "Can I call her?" Silas turned. "Marin." Finn nodded. "She probably thinks we don't want her here." Silas rubbed the back of his neck. "That's not true." "But it feels true," Finn said. Silas looked down at the tool in his hand. Maybe his son was braver than he was. He nodded. "Go ahead." Finn pulled out a small business card she had left behind. Simple, no company name. Just Marin Claymore and a number. He disappeared into the office to make the call. 15 minutes later, he returned, cheeks pink. She said she'd be here before sunset. When Marin arrived, she didn't bring blueprints or business plans. She brought a thermos of hot cider, a bag of gingerbread cookies, and a hesitant smile. "I thought you'd tell me not to come back," she said softly. Silas shook his head. "I don't tell people not to come back. Not anymore." They sat under the maple tree behind the shop, the last few red leaves swirling around their boots. Finn perched between them, munching cookies and swinging his legs. Silas finally spoke. "I was scared, Marin. That what you were offering might erase what Clara and I built. That this place would stop being ours and become something slick, something polished." She looked at him, eyes steady. "But what if it becomes more like Clara than you ever dreamed?" He swallowed. She went on, voice gentler. "You're not losing what you had. You're giving it a second life." Finn tugged on Silas's sleeve, "Like the radio." Silas laughed softly. "Yeah, like the radio." They returned to the garage as the sun dipped low, painting the walls in amber. Marin walked over to the back shelf and retrieved Old Reliable. She turned it over in her hands, the patched tape still holding tight. "You know my dad had one, just like this," she said. He used to say, "A real wrench isn't judged by its shine, but by the hands that trust it." Silas exhaled. "That's the kind of man who builds more than engines." She looked at him, really looked. "That's the kind of man you are." The next morning, Marin returned with sleeves rolled a clipboard in one hand and a box of thermal socks in the other. "I've been thinking," she said. "If this place is going to open its arms wider, we'll need more than good hearts and hot cider." Silas arched a brow. "What do you mean?" She opened the clipboard. "Job listings for 2 apprentice mechanics, preferably local youth. Funding set aside to refurbish the waiting room. I already ordered chairs, plus a heater that doesn't hiss like it's dying." He blinked. "You all ready?" She grinned. "I'm efficient when I care." Finn let out a quiet, pleased laugh. "Fix it, family. HQ is getting bigger." Silas watched the two of them, his quiet boy and the woman with a past, too polished, and hands too real, and felt something new settle into his bones. Hope. Not the fragile kind, the kind that rolls up its sleeves. That evening, as they closed up, Marin lingered. She stood beside Silas at the front door, the porch light buzzing above them. The air smelled like frost, and something warmer beneath it. She looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure, what did Clara see in you?" Silas smiled faintly. She said, "I didn't try to fix her, just gave her space to figure out where she squeaked." Marin laughed a full, rich sound. Then her voice softened. "And if someone else squeaks a little," he looked at her eyes full of years and miles, "I've still got tools." She stepped closer, her coat brushing his flannel sleeve. "Then maybe I'll let you find where I rattle." They didn't kiss, not yet, but they didn't need to, because sometimes the smallest repairs are the ones that last longest. And in that little garage on the edge of nowhere, the sound of something broken becoming whole again was the only music they needed. The snow came earlier than anyone expected. It wasn't the soft storybook kind that dusted rooftops and made kids race for sleds. This was the kind that bit into bones and quieted everything. Even Boone Auto seemed to fall silent beneath the weight of it, its tin roof sagging slightly, the cold seeping into cracks that had long been ignored. Silas stood by the shop door, cradling a mug of burnt coffee, watching the world turn white. The Mustang sat under a tarp, its wheels cushioned by snow, like it had always belonged to this season. But Marin was gone. She'd left a week earlier, called it a short trip to finalize things. Tucson again. Maybe Phoenix Silas hadn't asked for details. He told himself not to read into her distance, but the hollow in the garage was louder than any answer. She hadn't called. He hadn't asked her to. Finn noticed. Of course, children always do. He didn't ask about her, but he stopped drawing cars and started sketching storms. Instead, wind and pencil, snow and charcoal. His latest hung on the wall near the coffee station, a lone figure standing beneath a flickering porch, light hands in pockets, staring into the dark. Silas stared at it often. He tried to keep the rhythm going. The heater clanked faithfully in the corner. A few loyal customers came by tires to swap out wipers to replace. He fixed what needed fixing. He always had. But the weight of waiting sat different than the weight of grief. Grief was sharp. It tore through the air like broken glass. Waiting was dull, like trying to tune a radio with a bad signal and pretending the static was a song. One night after putting Finn to bed, Silas sat alone at the kitchen table with Clara's old ledger. He hadn't touched it in days. The last entry still in his handwriting read, "Fixing more than cars. One song at a time." But the songs had stopped. He turned the page and added another line. "Not every repair takes." The next day he tried to work like nothing had shifted. He changed the oil in a Tacoma, tightened the alternator belt on a Jeep that hadn't run since spring. But every time he reached for old reliable, the wrench Finn had fixed, he couldn't bring himself to use it. He left it on the bench untouched. At noon, he found Finn standing outside, bundled against the cold, staring at the road. "You expecting someone?" Silas asked. Finn shook his head. "Not anymore." Silas sighed. "Me neither." That night as the wind howled, Silas stood at the garage door and watched the snow pile up around the Shelby's tires. He hadn't moved it, couldn't bring himself to. It felt wrong to touch something Marin had poured herself into. Like disturbing a sleeping dog. He didn't sleep much. He sat by the radio, fiddled with the dial, letting it slide through static and half-caught melodies. No song felt right. Nothing landed, until finally, just past midnight, the radio picked up a frequency it hadn't found in years. A woman's voice, not a singer. A message to the ones who keep the lights on, even when no one else shows up. You're not forgotten. You're the warmth we come back to. Silas froze. It was a public service broadcast, one of those feel-good segments that played late into the night on small-town AM stations. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard one. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, letting the words settle into the hollow places. The next morning, Boone Auto was colder than usual. The heater had finally given out, and the backup wouldn't spark. Silas wrapped Finn in 2 scarves and told him to stay inside the office. He tried to light the pilot flame again, but the igniter clicked and clicked with no response. And then the doorbell clanged. He turned. Maren stood in the entrance, cheeks red from the cold hair tangled from the wind. She wore no makeup, no armor, just a thick coat, and a look that said she'd run more than driven. Silas straightened. "You're back." She didn't speak right away, just crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his flannel-covered shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He held her without thinking. "I thought you weren't coming. I didn't know if I was ready," she admitted. But then I realized ready doesn't come before love. It comes because of it. He exhaled slowly. "You left a hole. I left something else too." She stepped back and pulled a thick folder from her bag. Finalized funded legal. The Boone and Claymore Community Garage Initiative. Silas stared. "You went through with it because this place saved me, and I want to help it save others. Veterans, single parents, foster teens, anyone who needs a place to feel useful again." He ran a hand through his hair. "Maren, I was scared." "So was I," she said. "But I think we can be scared and brave at the same time." Finn appeared in the doorway, blinking at her. She knelt down, arms open. "I missed you," she said. Finn stepped into the hug. Later that afternoon, the heater roared back to life. Maren had quietly paid for a new one, industrial grade. She didn't mention it. Neither did Silas. Some things don't need naming. He picked up Old Reliable from the bench, tested its weight, handed it to Maren. "Still works," he said. She smiled, eyes glinting. "So do we." And in that moment, with the snow still falling outside and the radio quietly playing a tune no one could name, Silas Boone realized the winter hadn't taken anything from him. It had simply waited long enough for her to come home. The first day of the new year dawned not with fireworks, but with frost. It glazed every surface of Pine Hollow in quiet celebration. The mailbox, the gas pump, the crooked Boone Auto sign still held up by hope and rust. But something inside the garage was beginning to thaw. Maren stood in the middle of bay, two sleeves rolled elbow-deep in a 2001 Suburban that had lost its will to idle. Silas watched her from the office window, coffee steaming between his palms. She worked slower than Clara ever had, but no less intentionally. Every movement seemed to carry purpose, like she wasn't just repairing the car but showing it respect. Finn sat at a small folding table nearby, scribbling on fresh sketchpad pages. His latest a blueprint of the new waiting area. Sofas, not chairs. A coffee station. Books for kids. On one wall, he'd drawn a sign in crayon, "The garage that believed in you." Silas swallowed hard. Later that morning, the first of the new apprentices arrived. Luis was 21, just out of a community re-entry program. Nervous hands, eyes that darted like he'd forgotten how to trust quiet rooms. He wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big, and a backpack that rattled when he walked. Maren greeted him first. Firm handshake, no clipboard, no judgment. "We're not here to change who you are," she said. "Just to remind you what you can do." Silas nodded. "Can you turn a wrench?" Luis shrugged. "Only if I don't break it." "That's a better start than most," Silas replied. They started him on oil changes, simple, forgiving. Silas stayed nearby, but he let Luis lead. After the first car, the kid's hand steadied. By the second, he was humming along with the radio. By lunch, Finn had drawn a portrait of him. Luis stared at it, stunned. "No one's ever drawn me before," Finn said. "That's not true. I just got here first." The second apprentice came 3 days later, Maddie, 19, soft-spoken former foster youth with sharp eyes and a chip on her shoulder as wide as a tailgate. She didn't say much her first day, but she lingered near Maren every chance she got. By the second week, she was asking questions. Smart ones. Why this hose and not that one? Why a flathead instead of a Phillips? Why does this place smell like sawdust and cinnamon? Marin grinned, because Clara liked baking, and Silas liked building, and neither of them knew how to compromise. Maddie cracked her first smile, then not wide, but true. The garage began to change, not in shape, but in soul. The new heater worked. The coffee no longer tasted like burnt wood. A second-hand bookshelf arrived filled with dog-eared paperbacks and coloring books. Customers lingered longer. Strangers peeked in. And through it all, Silas moved like a man rediscovering muscle memory. One evening after closing, Marin stood in the center of the garage, looking around like it was the first time I used to think legacy was something you left behind. She said, "Now I think it's something you live inside." Silas set down his wrench. "Clara would have liked you. I wish I could have met her. She would have handed you a torque wrench and said, 'Let's see what you've got.'" Marin smiled. "Then I would have liked her too." She stepped closer, brushing a bit of grease from his cheek. "I'm proud of you. You know," she said. "I'm just trying not to mess it up." "You're not," she whispered. "You're holding it together." "All of it." Silas hesitated, then reached for her hand. It was cold from metal, but steady. "You ever think about staying?" he asked. Marin looked up, surprised. "I thought I already was," he chuckled. "I mean really staying. Roots. Not just resting between flights." She didn't answer right away. "Then I bought a house 2 blocks over." He blinked. "You would I close next week?" Silas stared. "You didn't tell me. I wasn't sure how to." It felt big. "It is big." "Is that okay?" she asked quietly. Silas pulled her gently into his arms. "It's more than okay." Finn watched them from the doorway, a new drawing pressed to his chest. This one was simple. 3 figures in front of the garage. A man, a woman, and a boy. Above them, written in careful cursive, "Some repairs are forever." That night, as the lights dimmed and the cold crept back across the windows, Silas sat in the office, flipping through Clara's old ledger. At the very back, he found a note he didn't remember seeing. It was scribbled in the corner, almost like an afterthought. "If you ever find someone who loves this place like I do, don't let her go." He stared at it for a long time. Then he walked to the workbench and picked up Old Reliable. This time he used it. The first Saturday of March came with sunlight so warm and wide, it felt like an apology for the winter. Snow still clung stubbornly to the corners of roofs and the north sides of tree trunks, but the sidewalks ran clear and dry. For the first time in months, Pine Hollow looked like a place where good things could happen without warning. Boone Auto was alive. Luis was restocking oil filters in the back. Maddie was elbow-deep in a Dodge Caravan's brake assembly, muttering to herself with focus and fire. Marin stood near the register, sleeves rolled, jotting down parts, orders, with ink on her forearm like it was second nature. And Silas. Silas was trying not to stare at the line forming outside his garage. It had started small. A couple of curious neighbors, then some regulars, Ms. Porter with her rusted Prius, Mr. Winslow with his clanking Ford. But now there were cars lined down the block, not for repairs, but for the grand reopening of Boone and Claymore Community Garage. "Did you advertise?" Silas asked Marin quietly. She smirked. "I might have mentioned it in a local interview, and on the radio, and in a newsletter or 2. He blinked. "You sent newsletters? You think I wouldn't?" He shook his head. "You are terrifying efficient," she corrected, bumping her shoulder into his. The garage had been scrubbed clean for the occasion. The new chairs in the waiting room gleamed beneath sunlight filtering through the window. Clara, once hand-stenciled with the word, "Welcome Finn," had taped up drawings on every wall. Cars, people, hearts, homes. One near the door read, "Not just a garage." A beginning. By 10 a.m., the coffee station was emptying faster than they could refill it. Locals walked through the bays marveling at how the place had changed, and yet felt the same. "I used to bring my Buick here when your dad ran the place," one man said, shaking Silas's hand. "You've done right by him," Silas nodded, throat tight. "Thank you, sir." Finn walked Marin around with pride, introducing her like she was royalty. "This is Marin," he told a retired teacher. "She fixed the radio." "Well," Marin said, grinning. "I had a little help outside." A small platform had been set up with a microphone borrowed from the town rec center. Marin stepped up to speak as the morning crowd settled. She looked out over the faces, young, old, familiar, new, and paused just long enough for everyone to lean in. "When I first came to Pine Hollow, I was looking for something that wasn't broken," she began. "But instead, I found a place that taught me that broken doesn't mean finished. It means you've lived. And that with the right hands, almost anything can be made new." She turned, gesturing towards Silas and Finn standing in the garage doorway. "I found those hands here, in this garage, in a boy who sees the world in blueprints and kindness, in a man who thinks fixing cars is ordinary, but somehow ends up fixing people too." There was a murmur of laughter, of warmth, and today she continued, "We open these doors not just as a business, but as a home for second chances. For veterans looking to work again. For teens who need a place to matter. For anyone who needs to hear the words, 'You still have value.'" Applause swelled, not polite, but real. Silas felt it ripple in his chest, like thunder in soft soil. As the crowd moved toward the garage for tours and coffee refills, Luis pulled Silas aside. "I wanted to show you something." He led him behind Bay 3, where an old metal locker stood unopened for years. It had belonged to Clara. Her name was still taped across the top in fading black letters. Luis handed him the key Maureen had found weeks ago, tucked in the back of the ledger. Silas hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a small box covered in grease and time. He opened the lid and gasped. A set of handcrafted tools, the handles engraved with initials, C.B. plus S.B., and beneath them, a folded piece of paper. Clara's handwriting. "If you're reading this, Silas, it means the garage is still standing, which means you are too. These tools were made for you and me. But if you ever find someone who believes in this place as fiercely as I did, give them the set." Lovesy Silas's hands shook. He turned. Marin stood by the bay doors, smiling at someone's baby, the sunlight haloing her like a secret he'd always known. He walked over, placed the box in her hands. "What's this?" she asked. "Something old. Something that belongs to the future." She opened the box slowly, then looked up at him. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "You're not supposed to be," he replied. "But you're here. And that's more than enough." Later that evening, after the last cup of cider had been poured and the last tire pressure had been checked, Silas, Marin, and Finn stood outside under a sky, slowly darkening with stars. They didn't talk much, just stood shoulder to shoulder, watching as the porch light flickered on automatic. Now, but somehow, still full of soul. Finn broke the silence. "Do you think she would have liked it today?" Silas nodded. "I think she was here the whole time." Marin took his hand, and Finn took hers, and Boone Auto Reborn, but not replaced, glowed softly behind them, its open bays whispering a truth older than any engine. Sometimes the best things we build start with a wrench. And a wish. Spring came gently, like a whisper through the shop doors. It didn't arrive with fireworks or fanfare, just warmth settling into the bones of the building, coaxing tulips up through thawed soil along the gravel driveway. Birds began to nest under the eaves. The garage, once a monument to rust and routine, now felt like it breathed alive with purpose. With people with possibility, inside Boone Auto was never quiet anymore. Maddie laughed loudly as she told Luis a story about nearly dropping a transmission. He winced theatrically. "Please don't let that happen again. My back's got enough trauma." Luis, now confident enough to lead his own jobs, had learned the fine art of tuning engines while giving younger apprentices tips on their torque technique. The front desk had become Marin's unofficial command post. She wore her boots and ponytail again, but her laptop was always open beside the cash register. Sometimes it displayed spreadsheets and payroll schedules. Other times, sketches from Finn. One particular Tuesday afternoon, Silas stood in Bay 2 fixing a timing belt when he felt it. Stillness. Not absence. Not silence. Just the rare peace that arrives when everything around you is exactly as it should be. Marin walked over, holding a box wrapped in old newspaper. "This came for you," she said. He raised a brow. Fan mail. Maybe he opened it slowly. Inside was a metal sign hand-cut. The edges were rugged, the font carved deep into steel. Boone and Claymore, Restoration. Garage fixing cars, restoring lives. Silas ran a hand along the letters. "Throat tight, who made this?" Luis Marin said, "With Maddie's help. Said you gave them the tools. Only fair. They returned the favor." He didn't say anything, just hung the sign that same afternoon above the bay doors. At sunset, Finn joined them in the side yard. He sat cross-legged in the grass sketchpad and lap gaze drifting upward. "You know what day it is?" he asked. Silas looked up from the bench. "Tuesday. It's been exactly 1 year since the Shelby broke down." Marin smiled. "You kept track." Finn nodded. "I keep track of important things." Silas tousled his son's hair. "So what do we do to celebrate?" Finn thought for a moment. "We could take a drive." They all looked at the Mustang parked near the side fence. Its paint gleamed like sun-warmed glass, no longer hiding behind a tarp or layers of memory. For months it had been ready, but no one had taken it out. Marin glanced at Silas. "Think she still runs?" He grinned. "Let's find out." They rolled the Shelby down the driveway. Silas at the wheel, Marin beside him. Finn perched in the back. The engine rumbled awake with a growl that felt like thunder wrapped in silk. The kind of sound that didn't just say go. It said, "Remember." They drove past familiar fields, down pine-lined roads, past a row of mailboxes that hadn't changed in decades. Windows down the wind, in their faces. The Shelby humming beneath them like a heart too full to contain itself. Silas didn't say much. Neither did Marin. Finn held his sketch pad up to the wind, letting the pages flutter like a song without notes. After 20 quiet miles, they pulled over on a rise just outside town, where the valley rolled beneath them and the sun kissed every rooftop. Golden Moraine leaned her head on Silas's shoulder. "I used to think I belonged in boardrooms," she said softly. "That success meant knowing the end before you even start." He nodded. "And now I think success looks like this. Right here. This moment." Finn stood beside them, holding up his newest drawing. It was the Shelby, parked under a tree, but this time the car was only part of the scene. Beside it stood 3 people, and behind them, the garage. The sign, a line of people waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be restored. Beneath it in big, bold letters. "We fix what matters." Silas smiled. "I think we've got a slogan." They stayed until the stars began to show. Back at the garage, the lights glowed from every bay. The crew was still working late on their own time. Maddie tuning up a donated van for a single mom. Luis, teaching a 17-year-old how to change a flat. A woman from across town dropping off her brother's old pickup with the words, "I heard this place does more than fix engines." It did. It always would. That night, as Silas closed up shop, he paused at Clara's ledger. He hadn't written in it since winter. Now he took his pen and added the final line. Some legacies are written in grease, others in grace. Ours is both. Then he left the office light on just like Clara used to. Because sometimes, when the world feels dark, it's not the sound of tools that reminds you where you are. It's the hum of a place still working, still waiting, still open for what's broken, for what's lost, and always for what can still be made whole. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? It's always heartwarming to see how far these stories travel and how many kind souls they reach. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Moments Story so you won't miss the next chapter in our journey of love, kindness, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us. From our little corner of the world to yours. Take care, stay kind, and we'll see you in the next story.